Remco's gonna make you shake. Let's talk about Remco's Earthquake Playset. Well, welcome back to the Junk Room, everybody. It's me, the Junkman, coming back at you. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the coolest playset there's ever been, at least in the 1970s. Hell, it might be in the running for the best playset ever. Now, when you think playset, you usually think of a toy line and a playset that goes along with that toy line. You know, the Death Star with the Star Wars line, that carrier ship with G.I. Joe, Castle Grayskull with the He-Man collection. And when you think Remco, you think cheap, generic, rip-off toys at the dollar store. But in the 1970s, Remco, they had everyone beat with one of the coolest playsets ever, called Earthquake. Now, this wasn't officially part of the Earthquake movie that was released around the same time as the toy, 1974. Right around there is when the toy came out. But I'm sure they timed it right to capitalize on the release of the movie. This thing was awesome. Now, I know I had this as a kid, or I should say my brother had this as a kid. And sadly, I have very small memories of it as a kid playing with it. I remember it being set up. I mean, this thing was 5 feet tall. So you can imagine a kid, 4, 6 years old. This thing was about as tall as you were. It was awesome. But most of my memories for this thing is a little later, when it became a relic in the attic of my house, of my parents' house. Up in the attic, next to the Christmas tree. Pushed in the very back was the Earthquake box. And inside, I can remember, whenever we pulled anything out of the attic, it was, "What are you doing up there? Leave that junk alone. Get out of there, jump kid." But I can remember parents going out to Red Lobster, leaving us at home, or summertime, latchkey kid, parents are at work, I'm at home, brother and the sister's probably out having fun. What do? Pull down the attic, climb up the stairs, get this big old box, try to get down the wooden stairs with it, and set it up. This was years after it was new, so we're talking probably the early 80s here, and I would build this thing. And I remember it was missing parts by then, but it was still set up. Now what you do, you set this thing up, it's 5 feet tall, and it came with all these figures. You would stand around it or put on the ledges like they're about to jump off and everything. It would come with rescue helicopters. And the oddest thing I remember it coming with was a record. That's right, a record. It was a record, but it was one of those flimsy paper-like records. I don't know exactly what they're made out of. They're vinyl, I guess, but they're I wouldn't say they were paper, but they were actually, you could make you could shake them around and everything. It wasn't like a real record, but it would play on your record player. So you would set all this up in the living room. Put people up on the ledge, put people around the bottom, have people, hanging off for dear life. Put this record on, and it's a soundtrack for the playset. Who ever heard of such a thing? Can you imagine if they had a Death Star playset, came with a record that you could play that was the sounds of the Death Star as you played with it? It would just add more fun to it, wouldn't it? That would be cool if the playset actually played it and you had to put on a record and, play with it near a stereo. Because back then stereos were huge and everything. But it was still awesome to have. Like I said, it came with like 24 action. Well, it wasn't action, but they were just plastic people, all one color. But it was still really cool. 2 rescue trucks, 2 helicopters. I tell you, the only thing would have made this great if I took the little gorilla from my sister's Fisher-Price set and let it climb up the side of it like King Kong. That probably would have made this a little better. But overall, I don't know how many of you out there remember this thing, but it is completely awesome. And not only that, it had 2, not 1, but 2 working elevators. Anyway, you set this whole thing up, press a button, it would swing back and forth. It would fall apart like the earthquake hit it. And you had to get the people off of it. You had to get the rescue choppers. You had to save lives. It was the best fun you could have with a toy that wasn't part of a action figure line. I mean, this was just it. You got the Earthquake playset. That's all you needed to have fun. But me sitting here telling you about how it was in my attic and all that's not going to do this thing justice. Let's look at the photos. I think this Earthquake playset and Pass the Nuts game are my 2 youngest memories when it comes to toys. As you can see here, it was billed as the largest playset ever, and I think it was, at least at the time. Hell, it might still be. In the early 70s, disaster films were huge. You had The Towering Inferno, Earthquake, and those airport movies. People in the 70s wanted to see others in terror. And here it was, swaying action with the Earthquake Tower playset. I mean, just look at this thing. It is beautiful. It's a work of toy art. Sadly, it's kind of forgotten when people talk toys. I don't know why. This thing should be right up there with any list where people rank the best playsets. Maybe because it wasn't with an action figure line, it gets looked over. But you had more than just playing with this thing. It was different because, one thing, it made you the hero. You weren't just playing with the figures. You had to rescue them. When that record started playing and that Earthquake Tower started swaying back and forth, it was like you went to heaven. So what was this record that you played along with the playset? Well, let's take a listen. That was like my Beatles in the 1970s. I would play this just as much as I played probably Detroit Rock City from the Destroyer album. Now the whole thing is just a little under 4 minutes, so I'm not going to play it all. And if you're playing with this tower, I'm sure you would have to restart the record over and over again. I barely remember the record. I don't think by the time I discovered it in the attic we still had the record, but I can remember that record being with the playset. It was weird to have a record with your playset, but it was, as they say, pretty cool. What about this thing today in the collector's market? Well, anything with lots of parts and pieces is always hard to find complete. And I looked on eBay to see what this was going for. I only could find one in the sold history, and that sold for around $220 with box, which isn't that bad of a price. And I looked on eBay also. Could only find one that was currently being auctioned off. I'm not sure if all the pieces was with that one, but I'm guessing this thing must be pretty rare then, or hard to find in good condition. I don't know about you, but I think it would look great sitting over there in the junk room. How much did this thing cost when it was released in 1974? Its retail price was $16.66. Kind of creepy, right? $666. But I'm sure stores sold it for a little over or maybe a little under, so I'm going to say $17. And I also looked it up to see what $17 in 1974 is today. And if the calculations are right from usinflatorcalculator.com, and that's $17 for 1974 is equal to about $90 and some change. Or, if it was sold by Hasbro, about $700 today. This thing was awesome. And I was just curious out there, who remembers this? Am I the only one that had this? I can't be. Again, I don't hardly ever hear anyone talking about this or remembering it, but I don't know why. It has to be one of the greatest playsets ever. Again, I see a lot of lists, the top 10 playsets, the top 5 playsets, the top 2 playsets, the top 1 playsets, but I never hardly ever see anyone mention this playset. It is awesome. Let me tell you again, 5 feet tall. 5 feet tall. Can you imagine being a kid and having a toy that was 5 feet tall that only would cost you $17 or $90 today? Still not too overpriced. I mean, kind of high, but not for a toy the size of you. And not only that, you got the figures. You got like 24 figures that came with it, helicopters, rescue vehicles. I didn't even mention the street signs and all that. This thing was just pure genius. I don't know why it wasn't remarketed and resold throughout the 80s. If they sold this in the 80s and I could put my He-Man figures or my Star Wars figures on it, that would just made it even more fun. When I got out of the attic, it was probably missing all the pieces. I don't remember what it was missing because back then I couldn't look on the internet to see what it was missing. I just know it had a cool box and it still would stand up and shake back and forth. And it was awesome. Who remembers the Earthquake playset from Remco? I can't even believe it's from Remco. That's crazy. Let me know in the comments below. Do you remember this? Or if this is all new to you, what do you think you would have thought about this as a kid? Having a playset that was that was about as tall as you. Awesome, man. Awesome. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this playset. Or, again, if you didn't have it, what you think of it now. And until the next video, thumb up so you like my content, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk again soon.
Hey, Junkman channel popping though.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.